Well, I graduated right after Pearl Harbor in 1942, and I had a major in chemistry and very close to a major also in physics and mathematics. I went to college in Rhodes College in Memphis, was very interested in science, particularly chemistry and other sciences, and went there in 1938. And in 1941, I was playing chess, and I got on December the 7th, and I got a telephone call from a fellow student, and I was informed about the attack on Pearl Harbor, and that changed everything. And many of the students left fairly quickly, just left college to get into the Air Force or in other programs. My college roommate stayed for graduation, as I did, but he was accepted as a Navy officer in Navy officer training, which was appealing to me, so I tried to get that also. And because of my eyes, they said forget it. And so, but the whole government at that time was deferring people on a 3-month deferment, which was renewable, provided they were studying science or engineering or mathematics, and because they said that the country would need more people with that kind of training. And so when I graduated, the college had me teaching chemistry during the summer session. In the meantime, I had been, I'd graduated with very high honors in my undergraduate, and MIT had offered me a scholarship as a teaching fellow, but that didn't take effect until September, and I went to, in September 42, I went to MIT as a teaching fellow and was lucky enough to get an office with what I found out was one of the best lecturers and best teachers in MIT. So that went on for the first semester, and I was taking courses at the same time. After the first semester, I went back home, and then when I returned in 1943 for the second semester, I found everything had changed. The colleges had gone into not a semester system, which was usual, but were now going continuously around the year. You'd take what amounted to first semester courses and immediately start the second semester courses, and then start the following year wherever it was in the actual year. And they had started to lose people from the staff because of the war, and they needed teachers, and so I was promoted from teaching fellow to a member of their actual staff as a chemistry instructor. And so then I was teaching regular MIT freshmen general chemistry, which was their first year course, and I was also teaching Army ASTP students. They were students that had been picked by the Army as potential engineers, and they were sent to MIT and other such schools to take engineering courses, full regular engineering courses of various kinds. So I was teaching these Army people, who were incidentally wonderful students, and because they were told that if they didn't do well, they were back in the troops, and they studied and studied and studied, and it was a pleasure to teach them. And I was being deferred for this, and that went on all through 1943, and but I wondered whether I was doing enough for the country as far as helping the war effort, and I had doubts about that. So I did extra things, and I did some work being lookouts for submarine attacks in Boston area, and then I finally joined the Massachusetts State Guard, which was replacing the regular National Guard, which was already in Europe at that time fighting, and because they needed home guard, and that's what that was, and that involved getting military training, which was the first military training I'd ever had, and I could do it and still teach because my weekends were all tied up with training and various things, and then Tuesday nights I had to go to a meeting in the armory, but apart from that I could do all these things. So I did that, and was fairly successful as a soldier. I didn't know that I would be, but I quickly was promoted to corporal, and so I was doing that. But I kept trying to go back to the business of naval officer training, and I got to be very well known at the Boston recruiting office, and so they finally said, well, they're going to need more people, and maybe pretty soon they'll give you a waiver of your eyes in Washington. And that went on until almost the end of 1943. They finally told me that they were almost guaranteed that they could now get a waiver for me in Washington, and that they would call me when it came through. Then I got a telephone call about the end of 43 or the beginning of 1944, saying that apologizing for the fact that they still couldn't get a waiver. And so I had to tell my draft board, and my draft board then wanted to help me out, so they made me 1A, and I was all set up for all the goings on to get you ready for induction into the Army. And I was immediately given an induction date, and my only request was I'd be inducted in Missouri, where my father was living at that time. My mother was dead, and so I was to be inducted at Fort Leonard Wood in near St. Louis. I was all set to be inducted at Fort Leonard Wood, and the head of the chemistry department at MIT said, you know, this is not good, because you were doing a lot for your country the way it was, but he said, we have a person here who is running a project of some kind, and war project, and you could probably get involved in that. And I told him I was not interested in war projects. I considered most of them boondoggles just to stay out of the service, and I didn't want to do that. So he said, well, as a personal favor to me, go down, because I promised this man that I would send him some candidates, and go down and talk to him and let him interview you, but if he offers you a job, you don't have to accept it. That's your business. And so I agreed to do that, and he made an appointment, and I went down and I talked to this man. Dr. Shadburn Marshall was his name, and he interviewed me for about an hour and a half, asked me all kinds of questions. And at the end of it, he said, do you have any questions? And I said, well, yes, I do. I said, what is this all about? And he said, I can't tell you that. And I said, well, what field of science is involved in it? And he said, I can't tell you that either. He said, but I can tell you this. We would like to have you on the project, and we will, I'll give you an offer right now. So he gave me a financial offer, and which was the same as I was getting teaching anyway. Not a big deal. It was $200 a month, I think. And he said, you can let me know right now if we'd like to have you, and if you accept that, or you can let me know Monday. And I said, well, I will not accept it. I will refuse it, because I cannot tell whether I would be of any good to you at all, because I don't know what field of science is involved. I don't know anything about what you're doing. And besides that, this was on a Friday, I'm being inducted into the Army next Thursday in St. Louis. And he said, well, we know that. And I assumed that the head of the chemistry department had told him that. And I said, and under the circumstances, I can't accept that. And he said, that's all right. That's fine. That's your business. And that was the end of the interview. And I went back and finished packing my stuff to be sent home before I went back to St. Louis for induction into the Army. And on Monday morning, I went back to my office to take some books and so forth that I had over there and straighten the office up. And telephone rang about 10 o'clock in the morning, and it was this Dr. Marshall who had interviewed me. And he said, I just called up to tell you that that you're on the payroll as of today. I said, you must have misunderstood me. I didn't accept the job. And he said, well, we know that, but you're on the payroll anyway. And I said, that's impossible. I'm being inducted on Thursday, and I can't do that. And he said, oh, yes, you can. And I said, no, my deferment is all up. I'm 1A. And he said, well, go up and talk to Dr. Hamilton, who's head of the chemistry department, and he has all the information. So I went up to Dr. Hamilton's office. He was a very good friend of mine at that point. And I said, what's this all about? And he had his desk full of telegrams all over the place. And he said, he's telling you the correct things. You are on the payroll as of today, and these telegrams are telling me that you are deferred for the duration of the war. And I couldn't believe that. I said, that's ridiculous. And he said, no, that's truth. And he showed me the telegrams, and it was. Over the weekend, the selective service directors in Massachusetts and Missouri had gotten together over the telephone, and I was deferred for the duration of the war, special deferment. I'd never even heard about. And so he said, go back and call Dr. Marshall back and tell him you know about this. And so I did, and I said, well, I guess I give up. But I said, you know, if the law then was that if you are offered a job on an important project and you refuse it, you're going to be drafted immediately. You've got to be inducted immediately. And I pointed that out to him. He said, well, if you want to go through that, that's all right with us too, and you'll be inducted, and you'll be put back in civilian clothes, and you'll be sent back here to MIT to do exactly the same work for $21 a month instead of $200 a month. And he said, that's kind of stupid. And I said, well, I guess you win, but I don't understand it. He said, well, come down and we can talk about it. I went down to his office, and he had a stack of papers on his desk, and he said, you'll have to fill out all these for me. And so it took me about, I'd say, an hour and a half or 2 hours to fill out all these. They are all kinds of questions. They practically wanted to know where I was born and what town and when, and also where I had lived in each move that my parents had made, and so forth. And I finished all that, and I said, okay, now I've finished all this. Now you can tell me what this project's all about. He said, no, I can't. He said, matter of fact, I can't even talk to you after today, because those things you filled out were for a special top secret clearance, and until through, I am not allowed to talk to you, to call you on the telephone, to have any contact whatsoever with you, and you won't hear anything from me until your clearance comes through, if it does. And so I said, I was just, and I said, well, what am I going to do? And he said, well, MIT has said you can keep your office, and you can do whatever you want. You can take courses, you can read, write, do anything. And I said, well, what am I going to read? I assumed that he would tell me books that would help me in my work. And he said, well, I'll give you a list. And he gave me a list of textbooks. And but he wouldn't tell me which ones I should look at. And so I took the list and went back and never saw him again, at least for a while. And I took some courses and did some things. I started to read the textbooks. I looked at them. They were about all kinds of different things. And I didn't know what I was supposed to learn. And I tried reading a few of them, which is a horrible experience to read a textbook without knowing what you're supposed to be learning. After my clearance came through, then I got a call from this Shadburn Marshall, who had interviewed me originally and said he wouldn't contact me until that happened. And he said, come down and we can talk. And now we can talk about what the project's all about. So I went down there, and I was startled because I went into the same door that I'd gone into before, which was in a laboratory section of the MIT. But this time, right inside the door, there was a Marine with a carbine standing there. And he let me in. And then I went into the office where Dr. Marshall's office was right by the door in a sort of a vestibule, which is where I had been interviewed in the first place. And he said, just a minute, I have something to show you. And he went to a safe, opened the safe, and came back with a rod of metal about 10 inches long and about an inch or inch and a half thick, and handed it to me and said, what do you think this is? And it was so heavy I almost dropped it to the floor. And I said, that can be only one thing, and that's uranium. And he jumped. And he said, well, you're absolutely right. But he said, we don't talk about uranium here in this project. We talk about tubaloi. And so, and turned out that was one of the several names that they applied. That you weren't supposed to use the name uranium at all for security reasons. So, at any rate, and then he started from that and told me what the project was all about. And he said, the project that we got you for is that the project is aimed at ending the war. And he said, we're going to try to use the fissionable properties of a special isotope of uranium to make a gadget, didn't use the term bomb, make a gadget which will cause these atoms to be all at one time be fissioned. And when that happens, the amount of energy released will be such that it'll be more of an explosive device than anybody knows about. And he said, if we can just make a gadget that will do that and let people know about it, it'll be so powerful that its very existence will stop the war. And I said, well, and he said, that's the aim of the project. And I said, well, that's fine. And I said, but what do we do here? And he said, well, turns out that the uranium is so chemically reactive that none of the processes that metallurgists use to fabricate the metal will work with this, because they'll either set fire to it or something. And so we have to learn how to fabricate uranium into special shapes and sizes by new means. And that's what this project is all about at MIT, and it's under the metallurgy department there. And turned out that Dr. Marshall, that was interviewing me, was had a doctor's degree in metallurgy, and he knew all about metallurgy, but none of that stuff would help with uranium. And but he was used to working with metals. And so he said, your job will be to invent ways to handle and make shapes, various shapes out of uranium metal, considering its properties. And that was fine with me. He said, you will have you can go to anybody at MIT to get help to make equipment, do things that you don't know how to do, and but you can't tell them what for. And then I got a big lecture on all the security things that we had to do for this project, and that became security became almost a religion in the whole project. I was joined by Noble Hamilton, and he came in from Chicago. He was already on the project in Chicago, working under Fermi on the piles that were under the football stands in Chicago. So the two of us worked side by side. I was working on certain methods of fabrication, and Hammy was working on different ones. And we were also advised on what kind of shapes they were interested in. And so my shapes were quite different from Hammy's shapes, but we didn't know anything, why is this? And we just did what we best could. And finally, we were advised that Hammy and I and Dr. Marshall, who was in charge of us, the three of us were going to be transferred to Site Y. And we knew that the Site Y was a very important site, but we didn't know what was done there or where it was or anything. We just knew it was certain. And Dr. Marshall said he thought that some of the advice that we were getting about what we should do had come from Site Y. So Hammy and I were given railroad tickets to Chicago. And Hammy said, oh, I'm going back to Chicago. They must have another site somewhere buried somewhere in Chicago. And we were told that when we got to the train station in Chicago, we should go to a certain place in the station, and we would be given further information. That's about as much as we were told carefully where the place was. We got these tickets, and we went to this place, and there's a man there that neither Hammy or I had ever seen before. And he walked right up to us as soon as we came and said, "I have further instructions for you." and he called us by name. And then he handed each one of us a ticket and said, "These are your further tickets." And he said, "Your train leaves in 20 minutes at track so-and-so. So you better hurry up." The tickets were marked that they were to go to Lamy, L-A-M-Y. And we couldn't understand that. And so we got on the train, and eventually the conductor came around, and we said, "What time do we get to Lamy this afternoon?" He said, "Lamy this afternoon?" He said, "You don't get there till middle of tomorrow afternoon." And so there we were, going to a place that we didn't know where it was. So we just made the best of it. We couldn't get any more information, of course. And finally the train stopped, and by that time it's starting to get into the mountains. And the conductor came right up and he said, "This is Lamy." And so we got our bags and got off the train in Lamy, and I think we were the only ones that got off the train. And as soon as we did, a WAC in uniform came up, and she called us by name and wanted to see our identification, which we gave her, and said, "I'm here to take you for further information, and we're going to go to Santa Fe." And we didn't know where Santa Fe was or anything about it, really. So she took us in a car, Army car, right down to Santa Fe and up to a little office right in the middle of the square town, and all intermingled with little shops for Indian wares and so forth. And we went into this little place, and there's at her direction, and she said, "You'll get further information there," and she took off. And we walked in there, and there's a lady at the desk, and she immediately called us by name and said, "Well, you were expected, and glad you're here." And she said, "You'll get another driver here shortly who will take you on further." And so we got into this next car, and we went up this windy, mountainous road, very narrow, with curves, without any guards, with 500-foot drops down there. It was a pretty scary ride. And we got up to the top, and here's a guard gate, and they're Army guards, all heavily armed, and they came out, and they had to check our credentials and so forth, and apparently we were expected, and so then we were told we could go on in, and this same car took us up, and there was a village that we went through, and a place that looked like a school or something, but with what looked like barracks type buildings all around, and then on to another area within this fenced and guarded area. There was another fenced and guarded area. It's a higher fence and with guards, and she just dropped us off right at the gate, and we had to show our identification again, and then we were guards made a telephone call and somebody came to escort us, and we were in the technical area then, which was a super secret place. And we got into the technical area and got taken up to office of a man who turned out to be the head of the division that both of us were assigned to, which was the chemistry and metallurgy division. And he went through, told us almost exactly what we had already been told by other people about what the project was all about, except for the first time he used the term bomb. We're going to try to use fission to make a bomb, and that was Los Alamos's thing. And of course we found out later that they called this place Los Alamos. My job at Los Alamos turned out to be to make uranium into little, let's call them blocks, that could be put together little by little. And it turned out that I was to make these for a critical mass experiment that was designed by Enrico Fermi, and these were to be put together little by little, and until they reached a critical mass of uranium-235. But of course we didn't have enough uranium-235 to do that at that time, so I was working with regular uranium but learning how to make these little pieces. I had a number of assistants from the Army, had brought in capable people to work as laboratory assistants. My job was to get a system set up so that when they got enough pure uranium-235 from Oak Ridge, that they could then fabricate all these this material into these little pieces, and then Fermi could have his people put them together little by little until the radiation level started to go up exponentially, and then that would be how much the critical mass was. And Fermi was insistent on this. It was a very important project as far as he was concerned. They had calculated what they thought the critical mass would be, and the theoretical physicists thought that was plenty good enough. And Fermi, who was not only a theoretical physicist, but he was also a practical physicist. He was amazing. My idea of a tremendous scientist. He could hold his own with Oppenheimer and all those people, and Teller and so forth. But at the same time, he could do something that none of them could do. He could go into the machine shop and help the machinist make some weird shape that he wanted, because he could run the lathe himself. And he could talk to anybody at any level. And I was thrilled that I would have some contact with Enrico Fermi, which I had in my course at MIT. His name was all over a lot of things that I studied. When we finally got enough uranium-235, then I had to make, with help from the other people that I was working with, those little pieces to be used, and we had to be careful not to get too much of this stuff together in one place, so we would make one or two pieces, which were quite small, and then each one of them would be put in a special container And but I handled the entire output of Oak Ridge, Tennessee, in terms of pure uranium-235. Problem is, with machining, like any other thing, if you machine uranium and you cut the oxide coating is what protects it from catching fire. But when you machine it, then all the pieces that fly out catch fire. So it's like a fireworks or something. In the first place, he was very approachable, and on this project he came into the lab and we talked about it, and then after I had successfully gotten all the things done, he invited me to come and watch the actual experiment with the first critical mass of uranium-235, and I did that. In order to do that, I'd have to go out the back door of our building and go in another vehicle to the site of the experiment, and I thought that was someplace else in the enclosed area. But the truck went right out of some kind of a pickup truck that I was in, and it went right out of the special area into the residential section, and then turned into a house right in the middle of a residential section into a breezeway, which had a canopy on it for a door, which wasn't unusual. And we went right in there, and then got out, and they had the whole inside living room and so forth of the house was gutted, and it was all a laboratory. And especially designed for this experiment, they just didn't want anybody else to see it, I guess. I don't know. At any rate, they had the wall was lined with counters to check for radiation and so forth, and so I was over to one side and quite a ways away, but it was within the same room, and so they started to assemble this stuff, and it worked all right, worked fine, and they quickly got to, you could hear the counters, it started, click, click, and then click, 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 and then all of a sudden it's click, 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 and they then immediately had gotten to the point where they were close to the critical mass, and they could determine exactly how much stuff had been put together, and it was very successful. After the experiment, Fermi's experiment, then they took that same material, melted it down again, added in the shavings that they got, and repurified it, I guess. And then that was the material that went into the little boy bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima. Hammy had to make, these were little rings of material, and he could only make one or two at a time because you get too much radiation and lose material if you got them together so that they would start to really work. And so the night that the day that he made the first piece, there was, of course, he had made practice pieces and so forth, and he knew that he could do that all right, but the big shots didn't know that, and so he started in the morning to make this first piece for the bomb, and that became well known by all the higher ups, military and otherwise, and the word got around, and Hammy said that it would be 6 o'clock wouldn't be ready to come out of the equipment until about 6 o'clock in the evening. So, and I was over in the lab. I don't know, probably been there all afternoon. And about 5 o'clock, people started to arrive to see this. And but Hammy isn't there. And Shadburn Marshall, the guy that went out there with us and was our direct supervisor, I guess, wasn't concerned at all. But somebody said, well, where is he? And so Shadburn told him, you know, the thing doesn't come out of the equipment until 6 o'clock, so there's nothing to see until that time. And but they still kept coming. And to put 5:30 or so, the whole lab is filled with military people with lots of scrambled eggs on their hats, and I don't know who they all were. And I imagine Gross was in there. A lot of the top physicists were coming in, and so forth. And they were all saying, well, where is the fellow that did this work? And they said, well, he's not here right now. Where is he? And Shadburn Marshall didn't know where he was, but we knew he was a very reliable person. And he was also a very relaxed person, which was a good thing in the view of the kind of work that he was doing. And so at 5:45, 15 minutes before it's supposed to come out, there's still no Hammy there. So now there's practically panic in this group. And they said, where is he? Had we better do something about it? And Shadburn Marshall kept telling him, oh, he'll be here, don't worry about him. 5 minutes or 5 or 10 minutes to 6, Hammy strolls in there. He was a big, tall, relaxed kind of way. He walked in a very relaxed fashion. And an Iowa boy. And so he walked in there, and then everybody comes around, and he looks around, and they're crowding in on the. He said, I want everybody to move back quite a ways, otherwise I won't open this. So they finally they moved back, and then he opened up and said, where have you been? Before he actually opened it, they wanted to know where he had been. And he said, oh, I had dinner at the mess hall, and after dinner I stopped off to watch a softball game. That's how relaxed he was. And he says, because I couldn't even touch this until 6 o'clock, and it's still a little before 6. So then he opened it up, and the first ring of what turned out to be shiny uranium for the bomb came out, and everybody was totally amazed. And then they had to put that away in a special container. And then that was one of a lot of rings that he had to make for the bomb, because he had to make a target, which was rings with a hole in the middle, and then he had to make the bullet, which was to be shot, which is little flat things that would go to be put together to go into that. Life was interesting after you got used to it. As far as work life was concerned, you were pretty much on your own as far as hours were concerned. Usually it was 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning. The laboratory assistants had more strict hours. They were living in barracks and so forth. But and then sometimes we worked nights when we had to, and sometimes we didn't. And so we were pretty flexible. We worked usually 6 days a week, 5 or 6 days a week. Sometimes we worked 7, but usually we had Sunday at least off, and sometimes Saturday and Sunday. And recreation was entirely outdoors. In good weather, we'd often go hiking on Sunday, and I started to hike with a group that were real hikers. And when I first started, I didn't really stay with the hike that long, but after I got used to the altitude, we ended up, was not at all unusual for us to do a 30-mile hike on a Sunday. And that got, even after you were used to the altitude, that was pretty tiresome by the end of it. Other times I went fishing, and I had people that loved trout fishing, and one of them had a car, and so we would go various places in northern New Mexico for trout fishing, and that was I did quite a lot of that. And I had never done any hunting in my life, but there were a lot of deer hunting, and Hammy had done some hunting. And we found out that we could get rifles from the we were on an army post, and in addition to the technical people, there were regular army posts there and army equipment, and all of the good army rifles were over in Europe or someplace, or in the Pacific. But they had 30-06 rifles, and that's what I had in the State Guard in Massachusetts, and I could take one apart and put it back together and do all about it. And so I got a 30-06 lent to me, and Hammy and I went deer hunting along with 2 other people. We were going on a special hunt in extreme northern New Mexico, right close to Colorado, in a place called Vermejo Park. I don't know if you've ever heard about it, but the land at that time was owned by one of the Fairbankses, and it was a big ranch. They were concerned they had too many mule deer in there, and so they asked the state if they could have a special hunt just for mule deer. And it was a private area, and but the state agreed to do that, and so they had a lottery to see who could get licenses for this special hunt. So we went to this 3-day hunt up in Vermejo Park, and that was a real experience. I did quite a number of things with this fellow Mainhart, who had the car, and Ted Blecker, who was his friend. They lived in a barracks right close to the barracks that I lived in. We always had a reason for a trip, and this one was to discover the hidden pit or whatever. There was a local legend about a special pit on the top of, they had a lot of mesas which were flat on top, and then on one of these, called the Black Mesa, there was supposed to be a cave-like thing, which was a pit which went all the way down to the Rio Grande River. And it was supposed to be where Coronado or somebody had buried treasure, and it's where he got away from the Indians, which were after him. He went down this bottomless pit, so-called, and we're going to find out where this bottomless pit is. Nobody knew. That was our weekend trip. And so the Black Mesa wasn't that far from us, and we went there, and we had to first of all get to the top of the mesa, which wasn't easy, and we went up this grassy slope, which was pretty steep, about 45 degrees or something, you know, and we had enough pretty sturdy grass we could scratch our way up, and we got part the way up that, and there was an eagle flying over, and it had some kind of an animal in its claws, and somebody made noise or something, and the eagle dropped whatever this was, and then got upset and saw us down there and came after us. And the eagle we were on this slope, and here the eagle came down and it had its claws out like that, and Blecker always carried a revolver, and so he never really shot anything with it, but he shot it and it scared the eagle off, so he didn't grab us. We would have been cut up with this eagle. And so the eagle got chased off and went around, and we thought he was going to make another pass, but he went, and I guess he got his prey that he had dropped. At any rate, apparently had a nest up on top or someplace, but that was scary. And after I finished the experiment with Fermi, then I had done what I was sent there to do. I saw the Trinity site, and I saw the explosion of the first bomb. And at that time, I was working in that division, the division that was called the B Division, and they were working with the final development of the Fat Man plutonium bomb. And so I was involved in some of the minor finishing touches on that bomb, on just the construction or design of it. And in that connection, I was in a group that was working on the military use of those Fat Man bombs. There was another part of doing parallel work, but they were all working to do the Trinity test, which was going to be mounted on a tower and so forth. Of course, they weren't working with the bomb part of it, but the internal things were the same. And so they, and that was in our division. And as the time came for the Trinity test, they said that the rest of us that were knowledgeable about this could view it, but we wouldn't be able to go to the site at Alamogordo for that purpose, because they were trying to keep the number of people there in case there was an accident or something to a minimum. And of course they had, however, Fermi and some of the big wheels were there, very close by. But they took us to a place about 20 miles away, up in the mountains, where we could look down on the test site. And they were sitting like monkeys on a rail, you know, waiting. And we didn't have any radio contact with the site where they were actually doing the test at Alamogordo, but we had a schedule of when the test was supposed to come, and if there was a delay, when the next attempt would be. If there was a delay, when the next attempt would be. They had a schedule of things. First one was, I've forgotten exactly, but first one was to be at 5 o'clock in the morning or some such thing. And so everybody was getting set, and we had a countdown. Somebody had a synchronized watch, which was same as the time down at Alamogordo, and so the guy would give us a countdown. He gave us the first countdown, and then it should have gone off. Nothing happened. And then he said, well, they had a little delay there, I guess. And so then they had a countdown for the next thing, which was about 15 minutes later or something like that, maybe 20 minutes later. And we had another countdown, and right down to 0, nothing happened. And then some character in this row of monkeys said, oh, I think I saw a dull flash just at the time it should have gone off. And then there was a rumor all around and discussed that apparently it's been a dud. And there never some young physicists there that had done a lot of the calculations for the thing. And he said, boy, I hope we didn't make a mistake. Because they didn't, in those days they had to use calculators or something, hand things, and they could easily put the wrong number in, you know. They had to check and double check everything. And so, but they went on to the next one and got down, and nothing happened again. And then the people are really concerned, very much concerned about it. And this went on until 5:30 or whatever it was, and it got to the point where I was concerned about getting back. I had to go back to Los Alamos and get my stuff and then get to Albuquerque to catch this plane. And I told the other guys that we were with, I said, we're going to have to leave here pretty soon because I've got to get back, otherwise I'll miss the flight. It was a military flight, but they were going to leave on time. And so the guys said, oh, we can't leave. And I said, we just got to. I hate to do this to you, but maybe some of you can stay and go back on the bus, but I'll have to have at least the driver and so forth. So we went, while all this was going on, they went down to another time, and nothing happened again. And I said, there's some big holdup. We had no way of knowing what it would be, and so we might as well just go. And but this time they all agreed we'll go. And the car was parked behind the bus right over the ridge of the mountain. Was sort of shaped like the top of my hand here, and the bus was over here, and they were sitting along where the view was over there. And so we went back to the car, and we got in the car and hadn't gone more than 50 feet, 100 feet, and all of a sudden the sky lit up like it was broad daylight. And the guy who was driving the car was a physicist who had done some of the calculations, and he said, hit the dirt fast. So he stopped the car, and we all hit the dirt. And if we had had enough sense, we would have, and this light in the sky just persisted and persisted. He said, I think this went way over. He said it went way over what we expected. Oh, my, that's it. And we should have just, instead of hitting the dirt, we should have run back to a very short period. We could have seen the orange ball going up. But he kept telling us, you better stay here. And he said, the shock wave will be here very quickly. Well, we didn't feel anything, mount anything. And we were 20 miles away, and there wasn't very much at all, and we didn't hear much. And so we saw it, but we didn't see the fireball, and that's a shame. Oh, Niels Bohr, that was an experience. We all had special assignments for eating. Unless you ate in the mess hall, you could eat anywhere you wanted. And Hammy pretty much stayed in the mess hall, but we had choice of going there or going to a special place where it was a little bit more, food was a little bit better. And so that's where I ate, at this special place. There was another place which was very elaborate, and that's where Fermi and all the big shots ate. One day, the head of our division came and with another person, and he said, he asked the whole group, he came at breakfast time, asked the whole group if we minded if he brought in a visitor who needed a place to eat breakfast. And of course nobody objected to it. And he said, I'd like to introduce to you Nicholas Baker. And Nicholas Baker was an elderly person, and he sort of bowed and then ate breakfast with us. And he was a very nice person, and he ate breakfast for a week with us every day, and it was nice to talk to. But he had this terrible accent. It was a very guttural accent, and you could not quite understand sometimes what he was saying, but it was interesting. And he's a very pleasant person. And everybody was excited. After about a week of that, this same head of our department came to me and said, I want to tell you something, that a top secret thing that I'm now allowed to tell you. But he said, I want to tell you about your breakfast companion, your new breakfast companion. Breakfast companion, Nicholas Baker, is really Niels Bohr. You know, it's like telling somebody that if you're religious, that Jesus has just come to eat with you. It's almost a sacred person. And he was a very, very nice person to talk to. I was a member of a group that we were going to Alamogordo, where they had the Trinity test. They wanted to make a radioactive map of the crater there, and so there was quite a group of us were sent down there to make a map of how much radiation is where in this thing. They wanted a whole map made. We'd go into the crater, which wasn't really much of it was just a melted circle of ground, and with this trinitite was the glass that the ground had melted to, and we would hammer a stake in with number on it, and they would have the same number there, and they would triangulate that stake, and then we would write down the amount of radiation, the level of radiation at that area. Then we'd go on to another one and so forth. We kept doing that, various sites along. And we had to do that for over a period of several weeks. And because we couldn't stay in there very long, there was too much radiation. We had radiation badges to measure how much our radiation was. And we had to take a new badge every day, and we had to change different clothes every day. We had special clothes to wear, and then when we got out of the crater, they were ditched and I guess burned up, or something was done to them. We finally finished our job and we had the data to make a map of the whole area, and a lot of radiation, and the radiation was very, some of it was terrible in there, and we made our ratings and then got out of there as fast as we could. Finally finished up, and late in the afternoon, we took off in the staff car to go back to Los Alamos. And right on the highway, here comes the Army staff car in the other direction. They waved us down and stopped us right in the highway. And they yelled over to us, "The war is over." And said, "If you're going back up to the hill," he said, "all hell is broken loose." And so we went up to the hill, went back to Los Alamos in the midst of great celebrations all over the place. And because one of the celebrations is that we could now tell our families what we had been doing all this time, which was pertinent for the people that were there with their wives and so forth, who never know what we're doing. And the whole place there were parties and drinking going on all over the place. All the barracks were just filled with parties, and there were parties out in the so-called campus and everything, and it was just something else. And Hammy wasn't with us on that occasion, but he was back there, and he was not much of a drinker or anything, and he said, "I think the best thing for us to do is to decide where we'd like to go, and just go down to Santa Fe and go." And he said, "I'd like to get out of here." So that's what we did. We took off, and what we decided is we'd like to go and see the cave that's down in southern New Mexico. We went down and got a bus first thing in the morning and took off and went to Carlsbad Caverns. And we got to the hotel there to get a room. No rooms. Everybody was there. So we got authority to sleep in the chairs. We were always conscious that there might be spies around, and so we did all sorts of things to prevent accidentally giving hints at things and so forth. Where I traveled, when I traveled up to Wendover, Utah, or wherever I traveled, I would see faces of people that I had seen before, but I didn't know who they were, and I didn't ask. But and this was an experience that many of us had that traveled on business, and they were, we hoped, people that were friendly, but we knew that they might be unfriendly, so we're careful not to give them information and so forth. And everybody had these experiences. Particularly when I went to Wendover, Utah, there were people around that I would see every time I went up there, and I'd never be introduced to them. They would never say anything, but they seemed to know who I was, but didn't. Only on one occasion did I have a direct encounter with one of these people. We weren't allowed to when we went to Wendover, we weren't allowed to take anything which gave any hint of New Mexico or Santa Fe or anything like that. And so just careful, we had to take labels out of our clothing and addresses off of any papers that we had, and all sorts of things. And we were conscious of the fact that we stayed in bachelor officers' quarters at Air Base, but we were conscious of the fact that while we were gone, people would go through our stuff. And so we hoped that they were friendly people, but there wasn't supposed to be anything that would give anybody any information. And I think that's what they were checking. But they were checked, we knew that, and we saw these same faces but didn't know who they were. And so one day I was coming out of the bachelor officers' quarters with a coat and tie on. I don't know what the occasion was, but I had just an ordinary suit jacket which had the labels taken out of it and so forth as requested. And I had a tie which I didn't think anything about, but it didn't have any labels either, but it was a woven tie that had a design which looked very much like it could be an Indian design, and as a matter of fact, that's what it was. But and this guy whose face I'd seen up there a lot said, for the first time he said anything to me, he said, "Good morning," and he flipped my tie like with his finger as a sort of a joke as he said good morning to me. But what he did was look at the label, and of course the label had been taken out of it. And so he said, "Well," he said, "that's a fine tie." He said, "Where did you get that?" And I said, "In Maine." He said, "In Maine?" He said, "It looks like it's an Indian thing." I said, "Didn't you know that there are a hell of a lot of Indians in Maine?" And he said, "Oh, is that so?" And then I got some other questions, which I figured this guy wants information somehow or another, and I hoped that he was friendly, and I assumed that he was. And so I smoked cigarettes at that time, and so I put a cigarette in my mouth, and I didn't have any matches on me or something. And he said, "Wait a minute, I got a match." And he gave me this match, and I looked at the matchbook, and it says Hanford, Washington on it, was where they were doing the plutonium work on some company up in Hanford, Washington. And I looked at it, and I looked at him, I looked back at this, looked at him, and he took the thing back and looked at it, and he said, "I got that out of a machine somewhere." And he said, "That doesn't mean anything." So I knew then he was not a spy, but he was somebody checking on us. And so, that's the only encounter I ever had live with those people at that place. You know, I had a date with a lady who was actually a secretary in the zone where I worked, she said that her girlfriend had a date with Klaus Fuchs. Now, Klaus Fuchs was one of the accredited people that went to Oppenheimer's seminars and so forth. But he was, I knew who he was, and I sometimes sat with him at these seminars, sat beside him. But he was sort of a strange person. He didn't say very much, and I couldn't understand what he really did. And he was supposedly had come from England, but his name was sort of German type name. At any rate, I wasn't excited about Klaus Fuchs one way or another, but she said that her friend had a date with him and that he had a car and he would be willing, she had asked him if he would be willing to take us along down to Santa Fe and back. And so she asked, my date asked me if that would be all right with me, and I said certainly, it's better than riding the bus. So we went down not early in the morning like the bus would be, but it was around right after lunch, actually, I guess, and which was fine. And we got down there, and Klaus suggested we go into a bar and have a drink or something, and which we did. We were sitting around this little round table. There were 4 of us. And that was actually fairly late in the afternoon, I guess, when we did that. And he suddenly started an argument with his date. And he got furious. And he was raving and he finally just threw his stuff down on the table and said, I can't have any more of this, and he took off and left the 3 of us. And here I am with two dates and no car, and he just disappeared. And we were trying to figure out what we're going to do, and we were hoping that they have enough seats on the bus, because sometimes it was pretty crowded. And so we just waited. We didn't know what to do, and whether he was ever going to show up again or not. And we were about ready to just go out and wander around the streets. And back he came, and he was all just fine, as if nothing had ever happened. In the meantime, both my date and I asked his date, what in the world was that all about? Because it was such a terrifying event. And she said, I don't have the slightest idea. And so then he came back and there was no problem. And I've forgotten what we did the rest of the evening, but we went around and did something. And then he was ready to drive back, but in driving back, there were people who had either didn't want to take the bus or they didn't have room for them, so we ended up with a car filled with people. There were double layers in the back seat, and several people in the front. It was really crowded, which was sort of scary because the mountain road was so bad. But at any rate, we got back safely and got back. That was the end of that, and so it wasn't much of a double date. But if I had been smart enough and reported him as a possible spy, because I think what he did, he used us as cover and went down and created a reason for him to leave us, and he went and contacted somebody and passed information. And then when that was done, he came back and he was fine. But it was much later that they found out that he was the spy that conveyed all the information that Russia finally got, and China. And it turned out that he was originally from a Eastern German country and had somehow gotten to Britain and established himself as a British citizen or something. And then he got from there as a scientist. I don't know who checked his credentials, but somebody did, because he got rated as for top secret clearance, special top secret clearance. And that was where all the information was coming from Los Alamos. Every Tuesday night in the theater, there were 200 of us who had proper clearance to be told about everything. And I did, and 199 other people. And we met in the theater on Tuesday nights. And Oppenheimer, this was his symposium every week. And the first part of it was exactly what progress had been made, where we stood on the bomb thing, all aspects of it, what the problems were and what we were doing about the problems. And so it was a good way to keep up to date with not just your own work, but what was going on other places at Los Alamos. And then the second half of the symposium was always a lecture by one of the very important scientists who were there. Sometimes for the second talk they would have an outside person come in from somewhere else, like Oak Ridge or something, but mostly it was people that, like, Fermi gave talks. They had talks from almost all of the Beta and other people that were in the top layer there. And Oppenheimer himself, very seldom, but he always spoke at the thing. Fuchs was cleared by somebody, just like the rest of us. And so he was allowed, and he had ability to know exactly where everything stood at any time. And so he had access to everything, and he knew who was involved in the work and everything else. And I never had any discussions with him at all, but he seldom talked. He'd be at the these seminars. Once in a while I sat, as I said, I sat beside him. I just happened to remember that, and I remember it really because I didn't really like him. So I had second thoughts because of that when I was asked to ride down to Santa Fe with him, but I went along with it. After 1949 sometime, right about 1950 or so, I had just gone to work for DuPont, and we had an apartment in Wilmington, Delaware, and Katie pointed out that there was a black limo or a black car that she always saw the same car parked right across the street from our house late in the day, and then after I came home, the car would leave, And she said, I think somebody is watching you. And so I said, yes, quite possible, because of my thing. And I said, I just hope, you always hope that they're good. I was used to people watching me, but you hope that they're good people and not something else. And but at that time, there was not a story about a spy problem with respect to the thing, Los Alamos, but there soon was a feeling that there had been some spy ring which had gotten information to Russia about how to make bombs and so forth. And so they were looking for that connection. And so they were, I think, monitoring everybody that had connections enough to know about all this stuff. And I did, and I suspect that all the other people that they could find that had been part of that 200 that I was talking about were being checked on. And the reason that they finally decided or found out that it was Klaus Fuchs that was doing that. By that time, he was even out of the country. He was in Great Britain, back in Great Britain, trying to go back where he came from, I guess, when they picked him up for the thing. And they decided that was Klaus Fuchs that had been involved, and that was announced on the news very quickly. And as soon as that announcement came out, that black car never came again. So that's the only reason we know probably what it was. They were somebody checking on me, and they found out that it was somebody else. And the British people picked up Fuchs over there and put him in jail. And then, I don't know how, but somehow he got out of jail. I think he was released on something. And of course, as soon as he was released, he took off and went to Germany, East Germany somewhere, where he had close friends, and then went to Russia. Ultimately, I think he gave the same information to China. At Los Alamos, I've told you about making the little pieces for the critical mass experiment. And after that was over, I was transferred to the B division, which was working on the assembly of the development of the Fat Man plutonium bomb. And in that connection, I not only helped work with it, but I also went up to Wendover, Utah, where the 509th Bomber Wing was being trained. And I flew in B-29s with practice drops, and I was scheduled to go to the Pacific, to the base where they were going to bomb used for the bombing of Japan. And the day before I was to leave, I was told that I wasn't eligible to leave and I wouldn't be going. And I asked why that was, and they said it's because you haven't had a yellow fever shot. That was part of what you had to have. I don't think there was any yellow fever at all on Tinian where we were going, but that was part of the thing. And somebody in medical I'd had all kinds of other shots, but no yellow fever shot. So they said, don't worry about it, because if the war continues, you'll be sent to another base which had already been selected, and I've forgotten where that was, but and you'll be there, and you'll probably fly in missions dropping bombs. So, because I was being trained as a weaponeer, so-called, and so I didn't get to Tinian, which was just as well, and but then after the bomb was dropped, I was still at Los Alamos, and after the war was ended and the things settled down, I was given other jobs to do. One of them was to make sure that we were properly safeguarding a lot of the equipment that was needed for making and checking on Fat Man bombs that I was used to. And I was also put in charge of the design and of a new monitoring device for the Fat Man plutonium bombs. I had several people working for me who were experts at making such equipment and so forth. So I was just telling them what we wanted to accomplish and what we wanted to check. And did that, and then they started talking about the bikini tests, and I was selected to be a member of the bomb preparation group. That's the bomb that assembles, the group that assembles the bombs that would be used there. That was because of my experience with the plutonium bomb. And and then in that connection, I did a lot of, they were converting a naval vessel into a laboratory vessel for the assembly of atomic bombs, which was to be part of the regular Navy. And this vessel was originally called AV-5. It was it was called the USS Albemarle. It was a seaplane tender originally, which had a couple of hangars on it and cranes to raise seaplanes out of the water and put on this big deck that they had. And they were converting that in Terminal Island, California, to a ship for to hold parts and to assemble bombs on board. And they were going to use that ship for such purposes on Operation Crossroads, which became known as the bikini tests. And when it was done, and then it would also be part of the regular Navy for the same purpose after those tests. And so I was told that I would be part of the crew of that ship in a specialist capacity. Although I would be a civilian on board, I would have the authority as a naval officer, and I would be asked to wear a naval uniform, which was not a fancy one. I was able to wear a regular naval uniform, but they said what we'd be wearing out in the Pacific were naval fatigues, which were just khaki pants and an officer's hat. Except our hats, instead of having officer insignia on it, had U.S. on there. And we had a patch which said Manhattan Project, but nobody knew what the Manhattan Project was at that time, so it didn't mean anything to anybody, and so forth. So I finally got my naval experience I had to do a lot of work on and help in getting the things set up to begin with as far as the technical aspects are concerned. So I spent a lot of time flying from Albuquerque, from Kirtland Field, out to the naval or military airport at Long Beach, California. I got into not real trouble, but it was uncomfortable trouble because we named we decided our group, that you've seen the pictures of our group, we were making those bombs, and the Air Force people all had their planes named, and so we felt we ought to name those bombs because they're important too. And so three of us were picked by the group to name the first bomb that was to be airdropped at Bikini tests. And so we named it, and we named it Gilda. And Gilda was the name of a movie with Marilyn Monroe, and it was a sensation on the ship. We got to see it on the ship, and it was the first new movie that we'd had for months. It was also a pretty sexy movie, and so we decided to name the bomb Gilda, and one of our people painted Gilda on the bomb and on the tail fin or something, and then somebody else pasted a picture of Rita Hayworth on the nose of the bomb, and I said Marilyn Monroe. It's Rita Hayworth. It's who it was, I guess. I forgot. At any rate, and immediately there was a reaction from the Army people who were in charge of public relations, because Admiral Blandy, who was in charge of the whole thing, was putting a lot of pressure on his public relations people. He wanted the people in the United States to get excited about the Bikini tests. It was a big thing. He didn't think they were worked up enough about them. And so he was asking them to find things to make of great interest. And they've heard about this, and they immediately came over, and they interviewed the three of us that had named the bomb, and they took a picture of the nose of the bomb with Rita Hayworth's picture on there, and so that was really exciting to us, and they said that this will go out on the wire services and so forth, which it did. And then Admiral Blandy caught up with it. He said, "This is introducing levity into this thing," and he scolded everybody that had anything to do with it, including us, that we're introducing levity into a serious situation. He wouldn't have any part of it, right. And he demanded that all the wire services cancel these things. They'd already been sent out, and if they'd already been sent out, they tell them they could not publish any of that stuff. And they did that, and so our name and fame went down in flame. And so found out later that the things on the wire, things that had been canceled, that they actually got into the newspapers in Hawaii, which had different time and so forth. And the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, my father was still living in St. Louis. When I saw him right after I got out, he said, "What is this business about Gilda?" I said, "How do you hear about that?" And he said, "Well, I had a call from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and they wanted to know if you had a girlfriend named Gilda." And I said, no, I didn't, but I knew what it was, so I told him they were trying to get some way so that they could use that story anyway by saying it had nothing to do with Rita Hayworth, and it was just my girlfriend who was involved.
Looking for an angle.
Yeah, they were looking for it, and the great that was picked up by Walter Winchell, who was doing radio. You probably remember that, doing radio stuff, and he had picked the thing up too, and he reported what it was, and said that this was the biggest stunt that a production person for a movie star had ever done. I mean, so, and Rita Hayworth was just mad at us. We thought that we'd get a party when we got back to California, but she was upset because she didn't want to have any association with that bad bomb. And in France, I've got a thing hanging in our apartment, framed, which I picked up years later, and it was from France, advertising in French Rita Hayworth's Gilda, and then it said the atomic girl, or something like that. The other bomb was underwater shot. The beta shot called was underwater, and I was on the island of Bikini, sitting around a table with some of my fellow workers, and also the newsman from the New York Times, who was their science editor, who had been allowed to follow the whole Manhattan Project clear through. He's the only news person who was completely knowledgeable, and he'd seen everything. And he said, well, what are you fellows going to name this bomb? And we said, we're not going to name it anything. And he said, well, you got to name it something. And we said, we got into enough trouble naming the first one, we're not going to try it again. And he said, well, you've already set a precedent. We said, what kind of precedent we set? He said, you've set a precedent that you've named the bombs after famous women of the flesh. That's the way he put it. And so he said, if you would name this, he said, an ancient woman of the flesh, like you could name it, I don't know, Helen of Troy or something like that. It's about the same, but nobody had ever batted an eyelash about that. And I said, well, that would be pretty stupid to name it Helen of Troy or anything like that, because it just doesn't ring with anybody. And I said, you'd have to name it Helen of Bikini. He said, that's good, that's good. We all said, that's not very good. And the character put that in the New York Times, that the bomb was named, that was the underwater shot, was named Helen of Bikini. And I have a copy of Time magazine where it has a picture of the bomb when it went off, and the title is Helen of Bikini. And I'm the one that did that by accident. I didn't intend to do that. And we didn't paint that on the bomb or anything, you know. But that's what went out to the press that time. And only interesting thing there is when we came back from Operation Crossroads, we came back into California and then had to take a train back to Albuquerque. And I was sitting beside a woman on the train. We weren't allowed to tell people where we had been or anything else. We were still in khaki Navy type uniforms. And she said she had a Time magazine, and it was open to this picture of the bomb going off, and with the Helen of Bikini on there. And she said, have you seen this? And I said, what's that? And she pointed to the picture, and she said, that's a bomb that they set off. And she said, they call it Helen of Bikini. He said, do you know why that is? I said, well, not really. Why? She said, well, it's because this cloud looks exactly like a woman. And I said, oh, that's very interesting. And I couldn't tell her who I was, that she was sitting beside the person who named the damn thing. I was in favor of it as a means of ending the war, but I think I was also in favor of demonstrating it rather than actually using it, as were a lot of the other scientists that were involved there. And after it really worked, a lot of the scientists felt that top people, not a lot, but several of them felt that they shouldn't have ever had anything to do with this. And I felt that under the circumstances, it's probably something that we should have done, but it would have been better if we hadn't used it. But of course they were confronted with the military on using it, and Truman was recently president, of course. He came from vice president, and he had a good head on his shoulders, and he sort of felt the same way that I did about it, but he didn't think of any good way to demonstrate the bomb that the Japanese would understand.